We have a couple new expansions for the game Pest, and these new expansions are going to be the Guild Hall expansion and the Clusters expansion. These are both individual modules that you can just mix into the game. If you're not familiar with how the base game plays, I have covered it in the past, and I'll roll that previous footage for you in a second here. But the Guild Halls expansion is going to be adding a new type of unit that each player is going to have in each of the 5 different guilds. On your turn, you'll be able to spend influence in order to advance any of your units up the different tiers within that guild. These can grant you with different abilities and bonuses, but you can also gain additional victory points at the end of the game, depending on how far your unit was up in the ranks within each guild. The cluster module introduces a little bit of semi-cooperative play, as there's going to be different strains of viruses appearing in the different cities, and these can cause additional sick people to appear within those cities. And an individual player can go ahead and get rid of one of those tokens by spending 2 research tokens, as well as taking a research action. But if there are 2 players with their plague doctors in that location, they can agree to work together and get rid of that cluster token for free, which also gains them 3 influence immediately. During the final stage of the game, a cluster token will spawn in the capital city, which is going to be spawning sick people to all locations adjacent to that city, which can really ramp up the amount that players are going to have to deal with. But if this sounds interesting to you, there's also going to be a second edition of the game that's going to fix a couple issues with the original printing. And if you do want to know how the base game plays, I'll just go ahead and play that previous footage for you now.
And this is a competitive game where players are leaders of different houses in an empire that's been struck by plague. And players are going to be competing to build up the empire back to its former glory, gaining victory points and renown for their contributions towards doing so. Players are going to be taking turns placing workers on their own personal player board in order to perform actions, and the different actions you can perform are to harvest different resources, spend those resources to build different buildings, move your containment teams around on the board in order to cure and quarantine different people, and then you can also assign your healthy population to work in your constructed buildings or send them as diplomats in the capital city in order to gain influence and bring additional benefits. But the thing that I really like about this game and what makes it really unique is the way the action selection works, because each player is going to have their own action selection grid on their own personal player board, and you're going to be putting your worker in one of those locations on the grid, and that's going to allow you to perform 2 different actions. All your actions are going to be associated with either a row or column along the top or side of this grid, and wherever you put your worker within those rows and columns dictates the 2 actions that you have access to. Of course, each worker is also going to take up a spot on that grid, so you're only going to be able to get that combination once in a round. The players can also upgrade these actions throughout the game as they build different buildings and research different technologies, creating multiple paths to victory, but then also creating a bit of an engine that's going to ramp up until the end of the game. Players will get all sorts of different benefits for doing all this, but of course rebuilding the city and curing it of the plague will all gain you victory points, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game.